The helicopters came in after dark. By then, the ship had already been worn for hours. A U.S. destroyer had disabled its propulsion. The vessel was dead in the water, sitting in the Arabian Sea with its lights, its crew, its cargo, and its next move, all reduced to one question. What happens when Marines start dropping onto the deck of an Iranian flagship while diplomacy is supposedly still alive? That is the scene, not a think tank sentence, not a vague headline. A real ship, real rotor wash, real men descending onto steel in the middle of the sea. And if you want to understand why this moment is so dangerous, you have to start there. Because the real story is not what the ship was carrying. The real story is that Washington chose a visible military humiliation in the middle of a negotiation window and then acted surprised when the political cost of diplomacy went up on the other side. People will tell you this was law enforcement. They will tell you the ship ignored repeated warnings. They will tell you the Americans had no choice once the vessel kept moving. Fine, you can grant every tactical argument and still miss the strategic one. The strategic question is not whether the United States had the capacity to board one ship. Of course it did. The strategic question is why it chose to do it now. In this way, at this level of visibility, while talks were still hanging in the air, because once the boarding happened, the argument inside Iran changes immediately. Before a move like this, the negotiators can still say, give us time. The ceasefire may be fragile, the pressure may be real, but diplomacy is still producing space. After a move like this, the hardliners can say something much simpler and much more powerful. They can say, look at what the Americans do while they are talking, look at what their ceasefire means in practice, look at what their diplomacy looks like when the cameras are on. You do not answer that argument with another carefully worded statement. You answer it by hardening. That is why I think this was such a dangerous move. And there is a second layer to it that I do not think people are fully grappling with yet. Boarding a ship is not a self-contained action. It is the start of a chain. Once you disable a vessel and put Marines on deck, you inherit a whole tree of consequences. I want to walk through that tree carefully because this is where the danger becomes visible. Start with the most basic question. What do you do with the ship now? Do you search it and release it quickly? If you do, then the entire operation starts to look like spectacle. You fired, you boarded, you created a global incident, and then what if the ship sails away after a search? The message to Tehran is not strength. The message is that Washington wanted the image more than the outcome. You seize it and tow it. That sounds tougher until you think about what towing a disabled cargo vessel near Iranian waters actually means. It means time. It means vulnerability. It means protecting a giant, slow-moving object while everyone in the region watches for retaliation by drone, missile, fast boat, or proxy. It means you are no longer managing one dramatic action. You are managing a floating crisis. Do you detain the crew? Then the situation gets worse. Because now you are not just dealing with a vessel. You are dealing with people. Maybe the crew is Iranian. Maybe it is mixed. Maybe there are third country nationals on board. The second crew members become part of the story. The incident stops being a clean show of force and starts becoming an international hostage argument. Do you claim the cargo is military and treat the ship as a wartime prize? If you do that, then whatever remains of the diplomatic track takes another direct hit because you are no longer signaling leverage. You are signaling that escalation has already outrun the language of negotiation. This is why I call this the theater trap. The theater trap works like this. A government facing pressure at home chooses a highly visible action because it photographs well. It looks decisive, and it creates the feeling of control. But because the action is more visible than it is strategically complete, it creates obligations the government may not actually want to fulfill. Once you board the ship, you have to decide how far the incident goes. Once the world watches, retreat looks weak, and follow through gets expensive. The trap is not the boarding itself. The trap is everything that comes after it. And that brings me to timing, because timing is what turns a military incident into a strategic mistake. This did not happen in a vacuum. It happened while everyone was still talking about possible meetings, possible envoys, possible understandings, possible openings. There was still ambiguity in the air. And ambiguity in diplomacy is valuable. The boarding cut straight through that ambiguity and replaced it with a picture no Iranian hardliner will ever stop using. That picture says one thing. America talks and boards at the same time. If you are an Iranian diplomat trying to argue that talks are worth the political risk, that picture is poison. If you are a Revolutionary Guard commander who never believed the Americans were serious, that picture is gold. This is the part too many people miss. They keep analyzing Iran as if it is one machine with one mind and one voice. It is not. Every major crisis with Iran contains at least two competing logics. One logic says survival now requires a deal, or at least a pause, because the economic damage is real, and another round of bombing may be harder to absorb than the last one. The other logic says the only thing more dangerous than war is negotiating from visible weakness. The moment Washington staged a televised boarding during a supposedly live diplomatic window, it shifted the internal balance toward the second logic. That shift matters more than whatever was inside the containers. Now bring China into the frame, because this is where the incident stops being a bilateral story. The source material around this event keeps circling the same question. Was the ship tied to Chinese cargo? Was it routed through a third country? Was it really carrying something commercial or something more sensitive? Those questions matter, but the deeper issue is simpler. An Iranian maritime incident now lives inside a wider U.S. China constrained, Washington wants pressure on Tehran. Washington also wants to avoid turning every Iran incident into a direct confrontation with Beijing. Those two goals are not fully compatible anymore. If the cargo has Chinese commercial fingerprints on it, Beijing has options. It can deny ownership. It can say the cargo moved through intermediaries. It can protest the seizure without owning the shipment politically. It can stay one step back while still extracting strategic benefit from the fact that America is now entangling itself with ships, routes, companies, and cargo chains that do not belong purely to Iran. China does not have to fight this boarding to profit from it. It only has to let Washington complicate its own position. That is why this operation may end up strengthening the very actors it was supposed to intimidate. Iranian hardliners get a clean propaganda gift. They can say the Americans are not serious about talks and never were. China gets more room. It can present itself as the calmer player, while Washington manages another incident with unclear legal, diplomatic, and logistical boundaries. And the Americans get the image, they get the footage, they get the immediate domestic headline, but images are not strategy. They are only strategy if the next 5 steps are cleaner than the first one. Here, they are not. There is a television logic in this presidency, and it is dangerous in a theater like this. Television logic rewards what looks decisive in the moment. It loves a warning, a disabling shot, a night boarding, a dramatic clip. But the Middle East is not a television set in this region. The image is never the end of the event. The image is just the opening move in the retaliation cycle. Because now Iran has choices, and none of them are good for stability. It can retaliate directly and raise the military temperature. It can retaliate indirectly and preserve deniability while still making the point. It can keep the response limited militarily, but hardened diplomatically, using the incident to raise the price of any future agreement. It can do some combination of all three. Notice what all of those options share. None of them make a peace deal easier. That is what I mean when I say the boarding was dangerous, not because America lacked the power to do it. America clearly had the power dangerous because it solved no political problem while making several others worse at the same time. And if you zoom out one more step, the contradiction becomes even clearer. Washington wants Iran to believe that negotiation remains possible, but it also wants to demonstrate that coercion has no ceiling. Those two messages do not reinforce each other. They cancel each other out. One says there is still a lane back from the brink. The other says the lane exists only until Washington wants a better clip. A government can sometimes get away with that contradiction against a weak adversary that is totally isolated. Iran is not totally isolated. That is the structural mistake behind so much of the American thinking here. Officials still behave as if pressure on Iran operates inside a closed room. It does not. Iran now sits inside a larger architecture of buyers, shippers, financial channels, intermediaries, satellite intelligence, and great power constraints that make every American move more politically crowded than it looks on the surface. That does not make Tehran strong in the conventional sense. it does make simple pressure much harder to translate into simple outcomes. So where does this go from here? I think the most likely immediate effect is not a full deal and not a clean collapse. It is a dirtier middle ground. More threats, more signaling, more ambiguity, more statements from both sides claiming they want peace while acting in ways that make peace harder. That kind of suspended crisis can last longer than people expect, especially when each side thinks a little more pressure will improve its bargaining position before the next deadline. But suspended crises are not stable. They are just delayed decisions, and the boarding makes the next decision more dangerous than the last one. If Washington pulls back from the incident, it risks proving that the operation was more theater than strategy. If it doubles down, it risks widening the confrontation in exactly the direction it says it wants to avoid. If Tehran responds softly, hardliners look weak. If Tehran responds hard, the region moves closer to another cycle of bombing and counterbombing. If China stays quiet, it still benefits from American overreach. If China speaks loudly, the crisis broadens. That is not leverage. That is a narrowing set of bad choices. Which is why I come back to the beginning. The ship was not the story. The story was the decision to board it at this moment, in this political environment, under these diplomatic conditions, with these regional constraints, and with China sitting just outside the frame. That is what makes the move dangerous. Not because the Marines failed. They did what Marines are trained to do. Not because the Americans lacked force. They had overwhelming force. Not because one ship changes the entire balance of power on its own. It is dangerous because it told every player in this crisis that Washington still believes it can run military theater and diplomacy on the same timeline without one poisoning. The other history says that belief usually ends badly, because once a negotiation has to survive a televised boarding, it is no longer really a negotiation. It is a countdown,